Welcome, dear readers. You're listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast book club. We're recording today from the Millennium Library in Winnipeg, which is within Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. In this episode, we will be discussing Hell of a Book by Jason Mott. I'm Dennis from the Idea Mill, and I promise I won't call you Dollface. Across the table from me is...
I'm Toby. I'm an outreach librarian based out of here at Millennium Library, and my favorite Nicolas Cage movie is Moonstruck. And across the table from me is...
Hi, I'm Trevor from the Louis Riel Library, and if your bingo card had a Nicolas Cage cameo appearance, well done.
A good book can carry me away from an average and ordinary day. Down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And you, dear readers, we wouldn't do this without you. Do you hear invisible people telling you about books? Don't stress, you're just listening to a podcast and forgot you have your earbuds in. We're totally real, and you can get in touch with us and tell us what you think of the books we're reading. You can find our email address and all of our social media outlets by going to wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca and scrolling to the bottom of the page. Hang around until the end of the episode to enjoy our favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. Before we dig in, let's do a quick check-in with the panel. How you guys doing?
I am nodding. Like, you can see me nodding, but
Your nod was really just for my benefit and maybe Dennis's.
Yeah.
I can interpret that by saying, I think Toby's all right.
That is correct.
I'll tell you something. I just finished reading the new Colson Whitehead book. It was called Crook Manifesto. And when I started it, didn't realize, although I should have realized this, that it was a direct sequel to his previous book, Harlem Shuffle. Mm-hmm. It's such a direct sequel that many minor characters appear without any explanation because you're supposed to know who they are from the first book. Now, I read the first book, not knowing that it was going to be the first part of a trilogy. So I enjoyed it thoroughly, but I did not pay the level of attention I should have to get the most out of it. So when I finished Crook Manifesto, which I enjoyed, it was the two towers of the series, obviously. It had to end on a cliffhanger. I went back and I read Harlem Shuffle. And I enjoyed Harlem Shuffle even more now, having read Crook Manifesto. But I'll tell you what, I now want to read Crook Manifesto again. And I feel like I've gotten myself into a Colson Whitehead loop where I'm not going to be able to get out of these two books. Kind of like those people who all they read is like the Narnia series, and when they get to the end, they start over. And so I'm a little worried that I'm going to need something to break me out of this. And not that I'm complaining, because they're both excellent books, but I'm a little worried now that I've done something to myself.
There are people who just read the Narnia series in a loop.
Yeah, is that a thing? Or like people who like their book clubs that they only read like Jodi Picoult books, or yeah, I'm pretty sure that whole Narnia thing is a thing.
We'll take your word for it.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's no need to Google that.
I just finished The Circle, which is Katerina Vermette's newest book and is the third book in her series about the Stranger family. And similarly, they're not really series, they're just like companion books. They feature the same characters, so kind of related.
Well, I was also, not to monopolize our tech in time, but very excited by the time this episode comes out. We'll be very close to October 11th. And on October 11th, Wednesday at 7 p.m., our next Tales at Night library program will be happening at the Goodwill Social Club. Our friends there have been very generous with their letting us do our Tales at Night there over the last few years. And this one will be our Halloween one. And it's always my favorite one because we get to read spooky stories. And sometimes people come dressed up in costumes and stuff. And I'm kind of looking forward to reading some spooky stories. And I'm also super interested because they have a new restaurant next door called Primo's Deli. And for those who haven't been to the Goodwill Social Club, when I say next door, you don't actually have to go outside. You just kind of go to the other side of the place and there's a restaurant. And this is apparently you get sandwiches, you get what you would get at a deli. And so I'm super excited to eat food from there and drink some beer and read stories and listen to stories.
Excellent.
And maybe do some karaoke after.
You know what? I just may. I have a couple songs that I'm thinking about. Karaoke comes on after Tales at Night. And Toby, you came just as a guest last time. You were not in any official library business. You were there, and you brought a friend that had a keen interest in REO Speedwagon.
No, Foreigner.
I was right. I mean, I can be forgiven for getting that wrong. Yeah. So maybe you guys want to come again. I'm not saying. Dennis, I don't know. No, not to put you on the spot. I know you don't go out at night, but, you might enjoy it. You might be celebrating, good times.
Never know.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Well, we hope to see the listeners.
If you don't want to leave your home, you can also go to what is it called? Staff Picks Live? Next Page Live. Something like that.
Live.
Yeah,
okay.
Here's a marketing tip, Toby. You should know the name of the program before you promote it.
Yeah, I should. It's October 23rd at 6:30. It's on Zoom, and myself and some other library staff are going to be recommending some books. And,
sounds great. Is there a theme to it?
Yes.
And Toby knows it.
Yes, I do know
But
it.
she doesn't want to spoil it for you.
Cozy something and maybe a little spooky.
Cozy and spooky.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Like a werewolf in a recliner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A Rougarou. So you don't need a library card. You don't need to live in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those sound like a couple of fun things to do.
Yes.
That sounds good. And so we're going to jump back into the book now with our usual warning that there will be spoilers. Toby's going to tell us about the author, and then after that, Trevor will give us a summary of the book.
All right. Jason Mott. Not a lot of information out there about Jason Mott. I'm always surprised when I start researching an author and there's really not that much about them personally. It feels like in this age I should be able to know like what he had for breakfast and who his childhood best friend was, but no such luck. So this will be brief. So he was born in Bolton, North Carolina. He was an avid reader from a young age. His mother would drop him and his sister off at the library while she ran errands. Do not do this now. Supervise your children while in the library, please. He loved mythology and folklore. At 14, he discovered the book Grendel by John Gardner. It's a retelling of Beowulf. And of this book, he says, I didn't know writers were allowed to take existing stories and make them their own. It was wonderfully exciting to learn. That's when I started writing. He attended Cape Fear Community College, Cape Fear, not just a 90s thriller, and also the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where he received a BFA in fiction and an MFA in poetry. His first published works were poetry, first 2009's We Call This Thing Between Us Love, followed by Hide Behind Me from 2011. The latter is an examination of comic book archetypes and questions of morality, mortality, love, and especially the eternal quest by humans for heroism in the everyday. His debut novel, The Returned, was published in 2013. It was a New York Times bestseller and adapted for television under the name Resurrection. It aired for 2 seasons on ABC. His second novel, The Wonder of All Things, was published in 2014. His third novel, The Crossing, was published in 2018. And his fourth and most recent novel, Hell of a Book, was published in 2021. Hell of a Book won the National Book Award. And it appears he just released a horror short story. It's called Best of Luck, and it came out a couple of days ago on Amazon. He continues to live in southeastern North Carolina, and he is a big fan of Nicolas Cage, and not just in an ironic way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll fully admit that this summary is taken from the publisher's website. I'm going to read it out, and if anyone has any comments or questions, I'm happy to answer them. In Jason Mott's Hell of a Book, a black author sets out on a cross-country publicity tour to promote his best-selling novel. That storyline drives Hell of a Book and is the scaffolding of something much larger and urgent. Since Mott's novel also tells the story of Soot, a young black boy living in a rural town in the recent past, and The Kid, a possibly imaginary child who appears to the author on his tour. For while this heartbreaking and magical book entertains and is at once about family, love of parents and children, art, and money, it's also about the nation's reckoning with a tragic police shooting playing over and over again on the news, and with what it can mean to be black in America. Who has been killed? Who is the kid? Will the author finish his book tour? And what kind of world will he leave behind?
So, how do you guys find it?
Well, this book's tone wasn't consistent, I would say. There was a lot going on in it. I wrote a blog post promoting this book last month, as I usually do, and Toby has done, and we'll share. And I made the mistake, if you want to call it a mistake, of writing the blog post based on just me reading the first couple chapters. And so I was describing this book as like, oh, it's a madcap, a laugh a minute, hilarious, delightful story. And, I could be forgiven maybe after the first couple of chapters, but then it goes in different directions. And I'm happy to talk about those directions with you guys. That's my take. It presents one way and maybe goes another way, and then maybe comes back.
I like that. I get that. I'm still unsure how I felt about this book. I liked it. While I was reading it, someone asked me what it was about, and I didn't know what to tell them. Like it was really hard to talk about. I think it's really unique. I've never read anything quite like it, and I think it deals with a really important issue. But I kind of need more plot from a book. I need something to like really grab me. And then I also I found it a bit repetitive in its themes, a bit didactic, I guess.
This book has a lot of things that I like. My favorite type of book in the world, or my favorite type of story, is the story of people who are overwhelmed by the world. It connects with me. I feel that. And to me, this was a book like that. The narrator, who is so overwhelmed by his own history that he has a condition, an imaginative condition, where he can't always distinguish between what's real and what's not, and who has forgotten very basic things about himself, like that he's black, which is, a moment in the book where someone's asking him why he's not writing about the black condition. And he's like, why would I do that? And I said, because you're black. And it's like, I am? I find a lot of stories that are hard to talk about often benefit from an air of unreality. Thinking specifically of like Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, which was kind of referenced by the way that he dropped the so it goes phrase early on in the book, or Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, which he also referenced by calling something a Catch-22. And it's something I remember reading about or hearing about in reference to like Star Trek back in the day, like in the 60s. They had an episode where they went to a planet and there were two warring factions, and when Kirk got them together, these people had they were black on one side of their face and white on the other side of their face. And they were asking him why they were fighting. And says, well, this person is black on the right side of his face and white on the left side. And I'm white on the right side of my face and black on the left side. And so it was about fighting over race, but because it was a ridiculous sci-fi thing, it got past a lot of people's filters, and they only realized towards the end what it was about. So I felt like this book was like that. It was a book that did some incredible comedy stuff and then went off in different directions and did a lot of unreality stuff so that it could talk about something that's difficult to talk about. But it lured you in by being kind of wacky and funny at the start. And, that was kind of my overall view of the book. It had those elements, the overwhelming nature of the world and specific things specific to the author and their experience. So I liked all that. It was a little uneven, I think, in parts, but my overall impression of the book was very positive.
To me, it had a very almost like cinematic feel to it, like that first scene when the author is running down the hallway in the hotel and he's naked and he's getting away from this jealous husband who is trying to chase him. And there's the old lady standing by the elevator, and then he just stops and he says, oh, I should introduce myself. To me, I saw that as a movie of sort of like being freeze framed and then like the voiceover narration and then starting up again. And there were other scenes that I could really visualize. So it's interesting that in your biography, Toby, that he was a poet, his background, because to me, I was thinking, oh, this guy's a screenwriter, because I just felt like everything was so well laid out, and the comedic timing. Like one of the funniest scenes I thought was when he's describing. It seems like all of his girlfriends are named Kelly, and he's on that one date where she has him up to her place to make supper, and she talks about how she just hates guys who tell her what to do, and then she's heating the oil in the frying pan, and he's thinking, I think that oil's a bit hot, but he realizes like I can't be one of those guys that she hates, and he's like, I don't know. And then the next scene is they're standing outside and the whole apartment is engulfed in flames or whatever. I mean, things like that, like I loved. And then the tone shifts, of course, with the storylines with Soot growing up. And, it weaves in this really poignant narrative. But before it gets really serious, I think we have to agree that first chapter is probably one of the most wholesome things any one of us have ever read about little Soot thinking that he's invisible, and his parents talking about, oh, what are we going to do? Maybe we can have all of his favorite foods. And he's sitting there, he's just all, and I'm just like, man, that is cozy.
Yeah.
Except for the whole, like, if you're unseen, you're safe, the safe and unseen bit of that scene.
Well, that was the whole undercurrent, though. That's like one of the messages of the book, or one of the things that he repeats many times, is about how parents always have to have that talk with their kids when they're black. That at some point you gotta sit them down and tell them, when the cop comes, you keep your hands on the wheel. When you say yes sir, no sir. You don't do any sudden movements, things like that, and how that's such a heartbreaking thing to do. And then, like, later on in the story, he's also mentioning about how his dad had that hands up game. Where he'd say, hands up, and he'd lift up his hands, and he'd, like, pull off his sweater, and it's like, good job, and just getting him used to raising his hands as fast as he could every time he heard the phrase, hands up. And it's like, yeah, they managed to do everything they could to try to shield their son from the realities of the world. But, yeah, when you see it, and you're looking at it, and you know what they're doing, it's like, oh, geez, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, at one point, there's the line referring to Soot as the bonsai of a child, which I really liked. It was, this idea of just like trimming away the possibilities and stunting the growth. And, you can only take up so much space. And that really stayed with me.
Yeah. The differences in tone really make for an interesting experience when you're reading it. Like, this is the most unreliable narrator that you can have, right? And a narrator who says himself, I don't know what's real. It was like when he got to that scene where he was doing the book club thing in Denver. No, it wasn't the book club. It was that thing where he was meeting. Oh,
the media trainer?
No. Where it was part of his book tour, and he just started going on about how you can't expect me to keep talking about my book.
Oh, yeah, that was like a talk show or something.
And it was only like 2 minutes into the interview. He thought he was there for an hour. Is that one?
Yeah, it was
and
like
he thought
right
he
at
had
the
just
end.
finished the interview, and it's like, no, it's just starting. It's like, you can't expect. We just talked about it, and he has a breakdown right on stage. Yeah. And reading that and thinking, okay, is this a real breakdown? Or is this like he's imagining a breakdown? What's actually happening? And then later on, it seems like, oh yeah, it was a real breakdown. He just toasted his book tour.
That was the thing too, because like he kind of tries to let himself off the hook at the very beginning by saying that I don't know what's real and what's not, and I have an active imagination, and I have an overactive imagination. So that as you're reading this, I have a hard time kind of connecting to many of his escapades because I wasn't sure what was real and what wasn't. Like the breakdown thing, was that something that was happening in his head? Was it really happening? Again, I think it did, because then there were the repercussions where his agent said, I can't work with you anymore. And he was stranded in the Denver airport, being freaked out by all the Masonic imagery. And it was interesting. Like I heard Jason Mott in an interview. He was being interviewed by a couple of, it's a British interview. And he was talking about, in his opinion, black writers are often pigeonholed into writing just about three main things. He said black writers are allowed to write about slave narratives, civil rights fictions from the 60s, or urban ghetto coming of age stories. And so he felt like he wanted to intentionally go out and write something that wasn't any of those things, right? Something that was totally kind of like his character in the book, not black. And isn't it interesting that the story that he came up with was about police violence and race and color in America, and not just one story, but over and over, like it's the book's DNA. As much as he tried to make it something else, it's
Yeah, I saw another interview with him too, where he was saying that like he didn't really want to write a story like this. He was hoping someone else would write a story kind of the way that he would write a story like this, and it didn't happen. And at some point, he thought, I guess I have to write it then. One of the things that got me in this book is at one point he starts listing people who, who were killed by police violence. And then he says, and whoever else this has happened to between the time I write this and the time you read it.
That's one of my tabs.
Yeah. And it reminded me of, and I can't even remember if it was this year or last year, which is disturbing, but I came into work one day and my boss goes, hey, did you hear about that shooting in the U.S.? And I said, you're going to have to be more specific. And she said, that one where, a black person went to a white neighborhood by mistake and got shot by the homeowner. And then I had to say again, you're going to have to be more specific, because by the time she asked me, there had been 3 stories like that in just a couple of days. And they all had big similarities, but in the end, it was a white homeowner shooting at black people and the black people were just there because they had turned down the wrong street and they didn't realize they were in the wrong neighborhood.
Yeah.
I think we're all super familiar with these narratives of violence in the US and how dangerous it is to be a black person doing anything in America. But more than anything, more than all of those news stories, more than all the journalistic pieces I've read about it, it's like this book really hammered home for me the absurdity of being a black person in America, where you're not safe doing anything. Like, you're not safe walking down the street in the day. You're not safe walking down the street in the night. You're not safe in your own house. You're not safe in your own bed. You're not safe no matter what you do. Like, there's always the possibility that you could just be shot.
And that's despite doing all the correct things, right? Like, was it Soot's dad who told the police officer, yeah, there's a gun in the car? Which is just like, was it Castile?
It's like an open carry kind of situation.
Yeah, that was Soot's uncle, I think, wasn't it? When he was pulled over.
Oh, right, that was the uncle.
But again, like, it's an example. Like, we can't even remember which incident it was, because there were several instances in the book where police are stopping and interrogating. So, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they also just reflect actual news stories that we have all read.
Yeah, like Soot's dad was
times.
jogging in his own neighborhood, on his own front step virtually. And that was a story that, again, none of these stories are not fiction.
No, and he couldn't make up anything that would be worse than what we've already read. Like, that's just it. It's the tapestry. It's the underlying thing. It's the thing that the author hates so much that he won't think about it and tried to avoid talking about it. Or the author as character. I mean, not the author. It's a little awkward when the author is writing about an author.
And we don't know the author's name in the book.
I know. He intentionally left it blank, which was interesting.
The writer, the kid, and Soot, they're all the same character, right?
Well,
are they?
I mean, I think so. I mean, the Soot is the childhood of the writer. And the kid is kind of at one point he's described as the pigment of an entire nation, the ghosts of all the black children or people who have been murdered. I mean, I feel like it's really kind of a Father, Son, and Holy Ghost thing. It's like this triad of people who are all the same character. It's one entity, Well,
I think there was a part where he actually said, where he was talking about whether the kid was Soot. Like, because he called the kid Soot at one point, and he's like, how did you know my name?
Oh, really? I think I missed that.
Oh, it was towards the end. It was one of the conversations he was having with the kid, and he called him Soot.
Well, both the kid and Soot are both described as being extremely black, and so
And
automatically we're going to connect those two together, right?
Certain things happen to both of them at 5 years of age and at 10 years of age. And at one point, and it might be this part of the conversation where he's having it with the kid, he says something. No, it wasn't where he was having a conversation with the kid. It was afterwards where, the kid's walking down a street at night and he gets stopped and asked, and then he ends up getting shot. He says something like, and it doesn't really matter which one it is. In one instance, the kid dies and there are protests. In the other instance, the kid survives and he grows up to write books. And so he's kind of saying, it's like, yeah, this is all vague and weird, but it's also because it happens so often that there's just little changes that happen between person to person, and it changes maybe how the future unfolds. But the events are so common that this could be anybody.
And that theme, I think, carried on too when he was at that book event in his hometown, and he looks out and he sees Soot's mother. Or
his mother.
But is it? Because quite often it'll say the woman who is and isn't my mother, or the person who looks like my mother but isn't, or the person. But then before that whole scene, he has a scene where he's talking about Soot's mother, who looks an awful lot like his mother.
I think it's that whole dream thing, where you have a dream and it's like, this is Dennis in my dream, but it didn't look like Dennis, but I knew intuitively that it was Dennis.
And that you could change the names, you could change the faces, you can change the identities, but the stories, the experiences, they're universal. But growing up black in America, and then either you get shot, or a loved one gets shot in front of you, or you're living in fear of getting shot. Those are kind of the options there that we're presented with in this book. It was hard to square that with the really funny scenes. You know, like I still like the really funny scenes, but I was sort of like, do they belong here? After reading to the end of the book. And I guess that's maybe the point, that he's trying to balance out these tones, because he's very deliberate in that the current day, the voice of the author, he's this kind of devil may care dude that's just like all about, alcohol and women. And he's, obviously trying to, what's the word? Escape. Yeah. From the reality, by forgetting and by trying to cloud his reality with all these distractions, right? Like in the beginning of the book, he doesn't even remember he's black. He doesn't remember what the book is about. Every time they ask him, he kind of just goes into this kind of fugue state, where people will say, it's a hell of a book. He's like, yeah, it sure is.
What's it about? Wish I knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when it gets to the part where he actually says it's about the death of my mother.
Right.
Right. And that's like, I don't know, 2/3 of the way through the book, something like that. The first time you ever get a sense of what the book is actually about.
Yeah. I think it comes even later than 2/3. Like I would say almost maybe in the last quarter of it, when he has an encounter with his mom / Soot's mom / his mom.
Yeah. I also found really interesting how he had 2 monologues essentially from white police officers. There was the one who he meets as the author, who he doesn't recognize, right? The guy's like, can I talk to you? I need to talk to you. Can we go someplace, And he's not sure what's going on. The guy's like...
The guy wants him to write a story, right?
Yeah, which is the weirdest thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's also like he's trying to articulate how that person might feel in the most almost sympathetic way.
It was oddly sympathetic.
Yeah. And it felt like, you can straw man a person's opinion where you say, oh, I want to do this because I'm cruel and you guys are nasty and I'm going to just be mean to you. But he didn't do that. He's like, he put up the whole rationale. It's like, we grew up in the same place. I'm poor. I was poor too. Our family was poor. I wasn't a slave owner. You weren't a slave. Why am I feeling guilty about all of this stuff that happened that I didn't have anything to do with? And I'm just I'm a good father. All these things. And he's like, I don't want to be judged by the worst minute of my life.
And that's when all the slave ghosts show up in the field after he leaves. Yeah.
Also that line though, I don't want to be judged by the worst minute of my life. I think that was the line that Brock Turner's dad used in defending him when he raped that unconscious woman. It's like, you shouldn't be judged on the worst decision, the 1 minute. And it's like, yeah, but what
As
was
an
that
aside,
1 minute?
that victim wrote a great book called Know My Name, but Chanel Miller is her name. Yeah.
And I don't even know if he was intending to refer to that, but that phrase just stuck out at me as like, you can't judge me on the worst minute of my life. But it was the most sympathetic one. And the other one was the officer that was intimidating Soot's uncle. And he was like, you're going to ruin that man's life. He's got a family. He's got, you people are just going to ruin our lives. And we deserve our lives. We deserve these things. We don't deserve to have bad things happen to us, to be exiled, to be punished.
That was not a sympathetic one, though, because he had a gun in the uncle's back during that speech. Yeah.
No, that was a lot less sympathetic. That was like pure terror, having someone do that to you. It's just pure terror. You've already been traumatized and damaged, and now it's just worse. It's like, oh, yeah, you're just going to take it, though. Otherwise, And that's
the scene also where Soot disappears, right?
Yes. Yeah. Which leads to trouble for his uncle, more or less. Yeah. Going back to what you were saying, though, I think the humor was a consequence of him trying to escape the memories and the trauma of the past and all those coping mechanisms. And so as a result, things get ridiculous. Things are absurd. It's totally absurd what happens to him, the different escapades there. It's absurd, right? But it's a consequence of trying to cover up this internal struggle and trauma.
And is any of it real? It could all be in his head. The whole running naked down the hotel hallway and the media trainer bit and that thing he was talking about with his call center job and the group that came and like threw candy at people. Like, who knows?
The culture people.
It might all be in his head.
Apparently he did work in a call center.
Yeah, I heard that too.
So,
yeah.
In another interview, they asked him, like, how much of this is real? And I mean, what can you say? But he said, like, 60 to 70% of the book happened to him. Oh. But, I mean, whether it happened to the author, Jason Mott, or whether it's happening to the author, no name blank of the book, is left up to be decided by, I guess, us reading it. It's interesting, too, like, right at the very beginning, the author, the unnamed author, wants the reader to remember that this is a love story. Mm-hmm. He says, remember that. That's important. And I listened to him. I remembered it. I tried to keep thinking, now, when is this going to become a love story? Is it the love for his family, his mom? Is that what makes it a love story? Or is it because the book that he's promoting in Hell of a Book is also called Hell of a Book, which also adds another layer of meta grayness to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is it a love story?
Well, at the end, he says, I'm sorry, reader. I wanted to make it a love story, but it fell apart.
I think it still was, though.
I think the way he phrased it, either there or in an interview I read, was that it was more like about coming to love yourself again. One of the things he brought up several times was kind of the self-hating nature of all the shame that is pushed on to black people. Like, he was ashamed of his skin so much that, like, wanted to disappear. Like, his parents wanted to protect him from his skin by disappearing. Even within the community, like, he was bullied all the time by other black kids because he was too black. And that kind of self-hating psychology that's kind of pushed on you by people shaming you for what you are. And then, so towards the end of the book, he's saying he's coming to love himself again to counteract that. So in that sense, he said it was maybe a love story still, just not like a romance like boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy finds girl again.
Well, and what you're saying too, I flagged a quotation from the book that I think is right on that topic. It said where the author is saying, I'm not sure black people can be happy in this world. There's just too much of a backstory of sadness that's always clawing at their heels. And no matter how hard you try to outrun it, life always comes through with those reminders, letting you know that more than anything, you're just a part of an exploited people and a denied destiny. And all you can do is hate your past and by proxy, hate yourself.
Yeah.
Which came just before his maybe realization of how he can start to cope. Maybe. I don't know.
There's a lot in there in this book. I found it very evocative emotionally, which is hard, which again was why the humor was appreciated. I particularly enjoyed the Nicolas Cage cameo in the middle.
What are your guys' favorite Nicolas Cage movies?
Oh, man.
He has quite the back catalog.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Willy's Wonderland.
Oh, I've never even heard of that one.
It's like a horror comedy. And I saw it referred to on a YouTube channel that kind of makes fun of different action movies and is very fond of Nick Cage. And then I watched the actual movie, and it's completely bizarre. He doesn't speak a word the entire time. It was kind of amazing. It's completely absurdist and weird, and yeah. I mean, you'll have to watch it yourself to judge it in any way.
Horror's not really my thing, so I might give that a pass.
Yeah, okay. Then you're missing out. It's kind of cool.
Well, the first movie that came to mind for me was Raising Arizona.
That's my second choice.
Because I think maybe it's the movie I've seen the most that has Nicolas Cage in it. But man, talk about a roller coaster career. I mean, the guy goes from winning an Oscar.
What did he win an Oscar for?
Moonstruck.
Did he?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
We'll have to fact check that. And then, to the remake of The Wicker Man. I mean, I think what happened is that he ran into some financial difficulty in about the mid 2000s. And so maybe he became all of a sudden a whole lot less picky in his movie roles because he had to pay the bills. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but it seems like
I saw someone's interpretation once, or their idea was that he just likes challenges acting wise. So someone will present him with a movie and it'll be a terrible movie and he'll think, I can make this work.
Yeah, like Face Off.
Right.
Which is kind of good, actually.
Yeah, I remember seeing it and
in a super cheesy way.
Yeah. Watching
him and Travolta try to play each other, playing each other was fun in a very cheesy way.
Yeah.
But I thought he really captured the way Nicolas Cage talks in interviews in that conversation they had.
I remember another movie he was in called Snake Eyes. I don't know if you ever saw that. I remember it was like technically a very interesting movie because it's all about this like a big high stakes boxing match, and then someone is killed at it. But the way it's filmed, it uses a lot of these really long takes. So technically, it looks like it's like a one steady cam shot, and those types of little technical things are super fun to watch. Have you guys heard of this movie that came out last year called Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent?
Yes.
No.
I've heard of it. I have not seen it.
I have not seen it, but it's a movie where Nicolas Cage plays a version of himself, where he's an actor, but he's kind of disillusioned with the Hollywood scene, so he decides he's going to retire. But his agent, who's played by Neil Patrick Harris, convinces him to take a job at this deranged billionaire who lives like on an island off of Spain, played by Pedro Pascal, who is apparently a Nicolas Cage super fan. And so he's just invited to go there to
Like in real life, he's a Nicolas Cage super fan?
Well, he may be, but, but his character,
Okay.
his character in the movie is a huge fan. And so he has to make an appearance at his birthday party, which he does for the money. And then, but he gets involved in it. Like, it's a weird, like, it turns out this guy might be into like international drug smuggling. And so it kind of becomes like an action movie. Yeah. I've only seen the trailer for it.
Yeah.
It looks like I was watching, like, yeah, I would watch that.
Anyway, so obviously we all enjoyed the Nicolas Cage cameo.
Yeah. It was so funny when he appeared and he was identified as Nicolas Cage. I could definitely hear Nicolas Cage's voice when he was talking. Like I just feel like kind of like you were talking about reading that Steve Martin book. Is that something you talked about on the podcast, or is that before?
I think that
was before. Yep.
He even has like these very Nicolas Cage mannerisms that I could picture, like even just like his posture and how he would be sitting on the plane.
Yeah.
And,
I like it towards the end of it where I can't remember. Does the author ask for a photo or something? And he says, "Don't ruin this. Don't do that."
Don't spoil this moment.
Yeah, don't spoil this moment.
Don't spoil it by asking me questions I can't answer.
Yeah. It was. It oddly was appropriate in this book, I thought, to have a Nicolas Cage cameo.
It totally fit in with the air of unreality that a lot of it had, which again I think it was like an essential part of the book. Just some things are so heavy that you have to disconnect from them in order to process them or to do anything with them. And if that means Nicolas Cage is on your plane and wants your autograph and wants to drop a few words of wisdom on you, then that's what happens. I did feel like towards the end it was more talking about the issues, like just kind of laying them out.
talking, not showing.
Yeah. There was a lot of showing leading up to that, but towards the end it's kind of like, okay, we've done enough showing. Also, here's the thing, you know?
Again, here's the thing.
Yeah, here's the thing. If you missed it before, here it is again. And in the end, yeah, he's kind of talking, like, in the end, the book, the narrative kind of falls apart a little bit. Like, it becomes really clear that it's a meta novel. It's like, it's about a thing. And I saw an interview with him where he was saying when he wrote it, he thought it was going to fail. He thought it was going to be a complete failure. No one would read it, might not even get anyone to publish it. And he was really surprised that it took off and really surprised that people responded to it as they did. And I kind of feel, you can kind of almost feel that in the book. Like towards the end, it kind of feels like, yeah, he kind of ran out of steam and he wasn't sure where to go after everything. Like, how do you wrap it up? At least that's how it felt to me at the end. It's like kind of like the author was saying at the end, yeah, I don't know what to do with this anymore. But that's also it. Like, sometimes when a novel deals with a heavy topic, you kind of want a finish that has a satisfying resolution. Like, here's where we go from here, or here's a situation where it worked out. But in this one, it's like, no, it just keeps happening. Like, I'm telling you about it, but it just keeps happening. You're not going to stop just because I told you about it. It's going to keep happening. So it's kind of a downer that way, but also no other way to deal with it authentically.
And we've talked about how there's like this repetitive kind of nature of the book and how we feel like it's kind of hitting us over the head with something and it's telling us, not showing us. And to me, I had the sort of image of like a coaster or a napkin on a table and someone puts one drink down on it and then takes it up and takes a drink and it leaves just a tiny mark. And then someone puts another drink down and brings it up and it's slightly more. And then just a drink after drink after drink until like the circle is dark and is not going to dry. And to me, that was sort of like what this book was. Like all these incidences were like this stain on this napkin. Just, it's so ingrained in the culture that It's going to keep happening, and it's not going to go away. And it's repetitive because it is repetitive. And tomorrow we're going to wake up and we're going to read about another story of this happening again and again and again. And there is no wrap up to it. There's, which again, is a downer. Yes, it is.
But that's just it. It's facts,
It's a hell of a book.
Yeah.
It's something you can count on as being reality and not imagination.
So definitely not escapist fiction, even though there's a lot of escaping in it. Mm-hmm. We could probably keep going on a bit, but we should probably wrap up for time. Any final kind of thoughts or statements?
I feel like I've said everything I needed to say.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many little moments that we could talk about, but we mentioned briefly the media trainer scene. Again, I don't know.
I mean, there's a whole theme about, the commodification of a writer that we didn't get into. But
exactly. I was thinking of that too. And like the business of selling a book versus writing a book and selling yourself as an author versus being an author and just writing. And there's all those kinds of interesting sort of insights that come up that are not necessarily tied to race, but tied to the publishing industry. And he kind of, quite a few kind of scenes that are lampooned.
Yeah, I watched an interview with Jason Mott. I don't know if either of you saw it, the one where he's on the Today Show. And it's a 6-minute clip. It's your typical morning show with bright lights and bubbly hosts. And they have this panel of their book club members. It's like a virtual panel, and they're all these white ladies, and they ask him questions, and he says, "Oh, thank you. That's such a great question." And he repeats the question and he answers it. And they talk about, the hosts are like, "Oh, this is such a funny book, but it talks about some really important themes, just totally glossing over the very dark, heavy aspect of this book." And it was like a parody of something that had happened in the book.
I saw that same one.
Yeah.
And as I was watching that, I was thinking, it's just like out of the book.
Yeah.
It's exactly like that. He's answering. So what is the book about, Jason?
Great question. Let me tell you, a hell of a book is about.
Yeah. And and when you wrote this, was it hard emotionally writing it? Like all these kind of, and it's like, did you read the book?
Yeah.
Did you read the book?
I think they legitimately did read the book, but it's just the fact that it's morning TV. They're not going to be talking about black children getting shot in the street. Yeah. They're going to be talking about the writer's madcap adventures on his tour,
Yeah. But it was like a perfect compliment to reading the book. Yeah. What they say, there's a lot of truth in fiction because you can say things that aren't factual, but that are still true in a meaningful way. And I think he accomplished that very thoroughly. And I don't think it's necessarily a book everyone will like, but I think it's definitely worth reading. Maybe we'll just kind of leave it hanging there like that, just like the book itself.
It's a hell of a book.
Yeah. Read it. And we didn't even make parallels between the situation in the U.S. and the situations in Canada, where as we write this, I voted this morning, and if this will come out after the election's done. So if you voted, thank you for voting.
I voted.
Yay. But also we had a party that ran a campaign thing specifically about not doing a thing that Indigenous people want done and just put it on a billboard. There's no parodying that. It's it happens here, different people, same thing.
Yeah, a lot of parallels between the Black experience in America and the Indigenous experience in Canada.
So there's another place we can draw lessons from. Mm-hmm. But let us leave it there, and we will move on to our next segment. Can you tell me a book I would also like?
My book is the book Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. It's a collection of short stories, and much like Hell of a Book, it deals with racism and Black identity. But here we also get quite a lot of themes of consumerism. The stories are quite dystopian. They present a future that's plausible, if horrific and bizarre. They're very George Saunders-ish. And Saunders was actually his thesis advisor when he attended Syracuse University. So you can really, really see the influence there. Like a lot of short stories, it's a bit uneven, but the first story, The Finkelstein Five, is just, it's dynamite. It's about this white man who kills 5 black children with a chainsaw. He decapitates them, and he gets acquitted by an all-white jury because while he admits to the killing, he says that it was in self-defense. And in protest, a bunch of black youths go around killing white people while chanting the names of the victims. So pretty dark and disturbing, but really, really great. There's another story about a Black Friday rush from the perspective of an employee who watches corpses get swept aside casually in a sea of desperate shoppers. There's a story about a young man who's an actor in this type of amusement park where players get to have a confrontation on the street with a black man who they are encouraged to use deadly force to stop. So pretty dark, but really great, really worth picking up just for that first story. And I noticed that Adejye Brenya has a new book that just came out recently. It's called Chain Gang All-Stars, and it was nominated for the National Book Award, which hell of a book won. So kind of nice circular moment there.
You know, even the descriptions of those short stories sounded very George Saunderish.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And for the Friday Black story in that collection, we read it, Tales at Night last year. It actually was the one right around Black Friday. So it was, again, well received and super disturbing.
Yeah.
My pick for a book that you may also enjoy is Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. Now, there are, I thought, oddly enough, maybe a lot of similarities between Hell of a Book and Fight Club when I went back to revisit it. The main character is unnamed in both books. They talk directly to the reader, as they also in Hell of a Book. And also there's a lot of commentary on modern consumerism and culture. So just to give a quick overview, the main character, he works at an unfulfilling job. He just cannot seem to sleep at night. He is an insomniac. And his doctor tells him that there's really nothing wrong with him, and that if he really wants to see suffering, he should go to self-help groups. And so he starts to do this. Even though he doesn't have cancer, he goes to cancer support groups, and he's able to get sort of a contact high off of the sharing that happens. And that helps him for a while until he starts noticing another person who appears at all of these support groups, who obviously is not ill themselves physically. And her name's Marla. And she kind of ruins his ability to satisfy that need. And so they break up the support groups so they don't go to the same ones. And that seems to work for a while too. Later on, he befriends a guy, Tyler Durden, who sort of represents everything that the narrator isn't. He's sort of impulsive. He doesn't have a lot of respect for authority. And the two decide to start a fight club where men gather and beat each other up to try to satisfy some kind of primal urge. And it goes on, and there are twists and turns. But yeah, is it a good book? I don't know. Chuck Palahniuk has gone on to write a bunch of other things. I think he's a bit of a one-trick pony, maybe. But Fight Club is the one that started it for him. So if you're interested, that's my pick.
That's a hearty endorsement. I wasn't sure where to go with book recommendation, so I listed a couple of things that maybe would connect with you. The first two I was going to say were Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut and Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, because he kind of obliquely referred to both of them in the novel. And those are both stories where the lead character is disconnected from reality and is having difficulty dealing with it, largely because of trauma, and both these cases, trauma related to war. And in Slaughterhouse-Five, the Billy Pilgrim, the lead character, is disconnected in time and experiences time in a disconnected way, where he just jumps from one moment in time to another throughout his life. And in Catch-22, the story is just told non-linearly, but it's a character who is in war, and he's like a bomber pilot, and he wants to stop fighting because he doesn't trust his commanders or his country anymore. And they just keep extending his tour of duty. And Catch-22, the phrase, refers to the fact that if you're sane and healthy, they will want you to fly missions, but no sane person would want to go on a bombing mission. So you have to be a little crazy to go on the bombing mission. But if you tell someone you're crazy and you shouldn't be on the bombing mission, then you're sane because you know you don't want to be on the bombing mission. No one who's doing the bombing missions should be, and anyone who tries not to can't leave. So you're stuck. So both of these kind of are about the human condition and the absurdities we find ourselves in, and the difficulty of processing any of that. The third book that I thought of that might connect for talking more about the Black experience in America is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot, which we have read before on the podcast. It's not the same thing as this book, but it's another example of the interaction between Black people in America and white people in America, and the system, which in this case, while not overtly hostile, is also negligent in the way that it interacts. I don't know the right word to describe that, but indifferent. Dismissive, yeah. Even with people who aren't trying to be dismissive or indifferent, still can be and still can perpetuate the system. And it's contrasted with the tremendous benefits to science that came from one woman's DNA, Henrietta Lacks's DNA, and her cancer treatment. Yeah, that's a little vague, but all three of these books to me kind of connect with hell of a book. With that said, we will now jump on to everyone's favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds, when we share words or phrases that got to us some way or other. Who's got a word?
My word is a very last-minute thing. I was having a hard time coming up with a word, so when in doubt, go for the obvious. So my word this month is hell. And I'm not going to necessarily talk about all the meanings of what hell is, because cultures around the world have different ideas of afterlife, but I'm just talking about more about the word and where does it come from and what does it mean. So you can trace its origins back to Old English, Old Norse, and Old German, either hell, H-E-L, or Hellia, H-E-L-L-I-A. It's related to the word kel, which means hidden. And so you get the word cellar as well from that. And I thought that was kind of interesting because in Hell of a Book, a lot of what the book was about was hidden until we got to the end. It was really about the unnamed narrator's mother. So in some ways, it literally was a hell of a book in that it was not revealed to us until the very end. But how did it come to be associated with a fire and brimstone place? Well, apparently we can thank the King James Bible for that, because in the older versions of the biblical texts, there were a couple of different concepts for a place in the afterlife that were taken from the Hebrew people. There was Gehenna and also Sheol. Gehenna was more of like a fire and brimstone place, whereas Sheol was sort of just the place of the dead. But good old King James just used the word hell for both of them. So the distinction between Gehenna and Sheol got lost in the King James Version. And now it's sort of a catch-all for the nether realm of the devil and the demons. I got that from Merriam-Webster, in which condemned people suffer everlasting punishment. But interestingly also, there are many meanings as well, right? It can just be general terms of abuse, like you could say, the hell with it. Or maybe not a metaphysical place of suffering, but a real place of suffering. Like you've heard the saying, war is hell, or chaos, right? All hell breaks loose. But then you could also use it like for fun and games, right? Like, oh, it was a hell of a time, or just for the hell of it. So I don't know. Hell, that's my word. Could have done better, I suppose.
That's a hell of a word, Trevor.
I didn't really give a hell this month. Hell.
Okay, I have something more fun than that, I think. I guess we briefly talked about the cinematic quality of this book, but we didn't talk about the film noir properties of it, which is where my word comes from. So my word is moxie, which is a word that I think you associate with that 20th century film noir, but that also pops up in this book. And so moxie, by definition, it means a few things. It can mean energy or pep. It can mean courage or determination, or it can mean know-how. And the word actually comes from a brand of carbonated beverage that was among the first mass-produced soft drinks in the U.S. It was actually created in 1884 as a patent medicine called Moxie Nerve Food, and was said to be effective against paralysis, softening of the brain, nervousness, and insomnia. And it rose to prominence partially due to its groundbreaking marketing efforts at the time. So it was advertised as nerve food, which would strengthen the nervous system and was very healthful and would strengthen and invigorate. So you can see how the word moxie came to mean those things. At some point, the medicine bit was dropped. It was sold as a drink. Soda water was added to the formula. The product's name was changed to Beverage Moxie Nerve Food at one point. And the brand still exists to this day. Oh. It's actually very popular in New England and Pennsylvania. It was actually designated the official soft drink of the state of Maine in 2005, signed into law by the governor. There's a Moxie Festival in Lisbon, Maine on the second weekend in July. Tagline, 3 days of peace, love, and Moxie. And it includes a parade, a Moxie recipe contest, and a Moxie chugging contest. And the Matthews Museum in Union, Maine has a whole collection dedicated to Moxie. So there you go. All the stuff about Moxie.
That is fascinating.
Isn't it? Yeah. We'll link to the Moxie Festival website and the Matthews Museum website because you can really get into it.
You got a lot of Moxie, kid. My word for this month, or I guess pair of words, they're connected. Hypnagogia, which is connected to hypnopompia. So hypnagogia is a transitional state between wakefulness and sleep. And hypnopompia is the opposite. It's the transition from sleep to wakefulness. These transition states are interesting because something like 70% of people will experience something called hypnagogic hallucinations or hypnopompic hallucinations, depending on when they happen. These can be visual or auditory, and can even include movement. Sometimes people have muscle jerks at that time. I actually experience that periodically where I'll be like nodding off to sleep and suddenly my body will jerk and I'll be fully awake and I won't know why. I've experienced hypnagogic hallucinations myself, and they can be very realistic. I remember one time my wife was on a trip and I heard her voice very clearly as I was waking up, saying my name. And of course it was impossible because she was in another country at the time. The word kind of fits in with me with this book where he's kind of always in a transitional state. And I think initially when he was talking about Soot's imaginative case, it's always started at like sunset. Mm-hmm. So kind of in that transitional state from day to night. And so it kind of relates. Hypnagogia. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this month. Thank you for joining us, dear readers. For next month, we're going to read and discuss Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. Nearly 25 years after Housekeeping, Marilynne Robinson returns with an intimate tale of 3 generations from the Civil War to the 20th century, a story about fathers and sons and the spiritual battles that still rage at America's heart. In the words of Kirkus, it is a novel as big as a nation, as quiet as thought, and moving as prayer. Matchless and towering, Gilead tells the story of America and will break your heart. Have comments or book suggestions for us? Send us an email. You can find all our contact info at the bottom of the page at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. You can also find all our past episodes there too. If you haven't already, subscribe to Time to Read on your favorite podcasting service, maybe leave us a review, and tell all your book-loving friends about us too. And until next time, make sure you find
Time to Read.
Recording today from the Carol Shields Auditorium at Millennium. No, we're not.
Which, where my word comes from? Do you want to know what movie Nicolas Cage won an Academy Award for?
Yeah.
1996.
It wasn't Moonstruck.
Leaving Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And then he was a nominee for adaptation in 2003.
Oh, right. That was another movie. That was really great.
Yeah.
So nothing for Moonstruck.
I think Cher won for Moonstruck.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Moonstruck was Bernadette's favorite movie for a long time, or at least she really wanted me to watch it.
You should watch it.
Oh, I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My wife wanted me to watch it. Of course I watched it.